Hello, welcome to Scarecrow Miniature Painting. I'm Steven, and we are on episode 6 of our Warlocks. Now, last episode we did these red highlights on his shirt and belt. We started on the silver, where his pauldron is and where his belt buckle is. We also finished his belt and sword and did some finalized touch-ups. Now, this belt was a leather brown, pure red, both from Army Painters mix, and it turned out amazing. You can see the difference in the belt compared to the cloth underneath. And with that being said, we are going to move on to, first and foremost, we're going to fix his face. He's got kind of a weird thing going on with that beard that I want to clean up. And he's just going to have a chin strap, I've decided. Now, I mentioned in the last video that there was some red we can add. We're going to add that red right now. Now, the reason we're adding this red is because it's a great accent color to black. And on this figure specifically, it looks excellent. Now, I added it. I don't know if you can actually see it. Okay, yeah, that right there. And while we got it, we're also going to touch up the red on the chest. There we go. We're gonna also do another touch up at the bottom here in this recessed groove of this somewhat pauldron, or not pauldron, greave. And before we start finishing up the silver bits, I am looking over the actual figure itself, and we are actually going to include a white accent, as if it is an undershirt. And normally I would thin down my paints, but with this going on black, I actually don't want to thin it down. The reason I don't want to thin it down is solely because of the fact that that black is going to dilute the white. So while that dries, I'm just waiting for it to come back through and touch it again. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my wet wash rag. I'm just going to staple it. Actually, we are going to, after second thought, we are going to thin it down a bit. It was a bit too opaque. So we're just going to take a drop of water. We're going to mix some of that in with it. We're just going to take a little bit of that. And we're going to, there we go. That is what we wanted to work with. Just going to pull that down to there. Now, his is a little bit higher up, so we can always just go back and add more black to that, which is not an issue at all. We can do that right now. In fact, once that dries, because that white's going to take several coats to clean up. So we're going to try and simulate getting it cleaned up as we speak. I don't want all that white on it. That's good enough. Now, we're going to go back and we're going to touch up our silver pieces. Now, this is gunmetal silver, so it is going to be a little darker of silver than I would have liked. However, we are going to be doing highlighting in this series, as we have said if you've watched the other videos. So we do have ways around that. The first and foremost is we can highlight with a lighter shade of silver. I can easily go and grab that once we are reaching the point that we are about to highlight. Another way we reach the effect is just adding a simple dot of white. White is an excellent accent to metallics because it brings out the color and gives it a natural highlight. Now you might hear baby Scarecrow in the background. It's his bedtime, and if any of you have children, you all know that bedtime is not a child's favorite thing. His mother is in there with him and trying to help him relax. We're going to add a couple more highlights there. I'm going to go around and look at that boot because I could have sworn I was right. This is a very unique figure because there are portions we can add silver to that I normally would not, but there's also portions of this figure itself that are asymmetrical, which is unique, in my opinion, to this specific figure. Usually when you see a figure, it is almost always symmetrical. Now you might have the one-off figure like this where it's not symmetrical, but there are bits that are. And then you'll have a figure that is completely unique in and of itself. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just checking, making sure that there's no other silver portions that I can hit. Because once the silver's done, we are moving on to highlighting. And just like that, he is done. Now the only other thing we have left to paint on this figure is his trident. Or pike, whatever weapon that is. If anybody knows what type of weapon that is, please let me know. I think that is a cool design, and I would love to know. Now, originally, I was thinking making that more of a chrome, or not chrome, bronze, but we are actually going to just make it silver. Try to keep the theme of the miniature to minimal colors. This way we're not having clashing colors throughout the miniature. I'm going to take this black. I'm just going to touch up his hair real quick. And there we have it, folks. He is done, and the other one is done. Now, the important part, highlighting. So, we are going to start with 2 different highlights. 3 with this figure. So, we started off with the green skin. So, with what we have in our palette right now, which is the skin tone, which was tan flesh, you're going to mix in barbarian flesh once I find it. Actually, let me look at that zombie real quick. You know what? We're going to do one quick addition. That zombie's mouth is open. Now, the black that we primed it in perfectly got in that mouth. So we don't have to worry about plugging the mouth up or anything like that. We're just going to try and get a little bit of water. To drop there. Still didn't get it. There we go. Now that might be too much water for what I put down. But that's fine. We can always add a little bit more paint. We're going to mix that up, thin it down. I'm just going to take a little bit of that paint. And get his mouth. Now, the tongue did indeed come back and decide it wanted to show up. So, you might be wondering, how do we fix that? A little bit of red on the inside of the mouth is always a good cover-up. For overpainting teeth. And it even looks, when you look at it, the mistake that we made looks like blood. Now, we're going to start with the skin tone. So, we used the tan flesh. Now we are going to use, there it is, barbarian flesh. Now, I'm looking over our miniature, trying to remember what we used for what now. This one we'll save for later, but these two are going to be these are going to be highlights. This is going to be a highlight of that. We're not using that yet. That's a final bit. That's going to be for our can use this as no. Before we move on to the highlighting, I am looking at one thing I do want to do. Now, I always say don't use matte colors or pure white, except for highlighting. So what we're going to do is right by that white that we had done earlier, we're going to add 1 drop of mummy robes. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take that mummy robes, and where we put that triangle, we're actually going to replace it with mummy robes. Now, that was a little bit too thick. So there is some cleanup that needs to be done, but not too much. Like so. So, we're going to work on the human flesh first. So, we have our tan flesh. We're going to add a little bit more to it. This way we know for a fact that it is not going to dry out on us. We have our barbarian flesh next. So what we're going to do is we're just going to put a little bit of barbarian flesh right next to that. Now you don't need a lot because these are highlights. We're only going to hit where we think a natural light would hit it as a figure standpoint. So we're going to thin down these paints. Now I'm going to pull some of the paint from one into the other. We're going to mix that together. That's going to be our medium. And now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it from here on the top of the hand, because I'm going to have the light coming down on this one. But with this figure, I'm also going to use this, or with that figure, I might also use it for the face. But right now we're just highlighting the tops of the hands. We're going to let that dry. We're also going to do the tail. Now we're going to do the majority of the tail. And this is why I said that we're not going to worry too much on the bottom of that tail, because we are already focusing on a highlight or any mistake that might have left it. Now, once that dries, as you can see on that hand, it's kind of hard to see on the video, but just that one little curvature right there on and the tops of these fingers is already showing up. So once that, we're going to move on to the next figure and do the same thing. Now this figure is going to be a little bit different. He's also going to have a blue highlight, which I do got to get out. And he's going to have his regular highlight on his tail and his horns. Their faces, you can highlight the face to give it a little bit more contour. However, with these figures, I'm not going to do that. The only reason why I'm not going to contour the face is, one, I would need a brush with that's a lot smaller than I have. I mean, this is a 4.0 brush, and this is the smallest one I have currently. We're going to take him off the base, and we're going to take him, and we're going to repeat the same process. The only difference is, instead of just doing the fingertips on that one, we are going to do the majority of the top. We're going to do the entire top of the hand on this figure. Oop, wrong color. And we are going to do the tail. Ooh, a little too wet. Bear with me while I clean that up. So, what just ended up happening was our paint was a little too wet. Didn't have enough paint to pull in, and it became more of a wash once it reached a certain point. So you do want to make sure that you're not turning your paints into a wash when you're thinning them. And now we're going to do his horns, which his horns are a little bit more prominent with this highlight compared to the other one. The other one we did just a little tip. This one, he has a lot more of that brow raised to do it. And we are going to do the top down the side of his hand, but not fully extending over that thumb. Because we don't want to dilute what has been done with that undertone. So now we are going to switch back to the other figure, and we're going to start with our next tone, which is going to be pure barbarian flesh. You want to take it, I typically take it about halfway from, or a little bit over halfway from the last highlight, and bring it up. Now with this hand, I'm just going to staple it in the recesses ever so carefully. This hand, I'm going to do the tops of the knuckle, curling over that hand. And with the tail, I'm going to, instead of going all the way down the tail, like I did last time, I'm only going to do the very top of the tail. That's what we got going so far. So let's switch back over to the other one. He should be dry. And we're going to do the same process. We're going to take that barbarian flesh. The only thing that's not really dry on him is his tail. That's fine. So we're going to take the barbarian flesh. We're going to take it over the handle. Now we're not going to go over the thumb on that one. On this one, we're going to go to there on the hand. We are going to go to here. On the top of the horns. And now we can do the tail, because the tail is finally dry. Once again, we're just going to do just the top. We're going to curve it over a little bit, but not too much, because we don't want to lose that bottom highlight. We're going to brush it over. We're going to move it over the top like so. And that's what we got going so far. Now, we are going to add another highlight to both of these before we move on to our green-skinned friend. We're actually going to do another 2 highlights. The first one is going to be a barbarian flesh and an elvish flesh mixture. So I'm going to put a little bit of that on my palette. I'm going to add a drop of water. I'm going to mix that up. I'm going to take that barbarian flesh. I'm going to mix it in with that elvish flesh. And that will give us our next highlight, which should, if done correctly, will be just a little bit lighter than the barbarian flesh. So, now what we're going to do So we're going to take this one, make sure he's on the base fully. I know we're at the 30-minute mark, but we are almost done. I'm going to stipple just the top two. Now before I was going down to 4, went up to 3 on the next highlight, and I've just gone the first 2. Now this one I'm just doing the knuckles. There. Now the tail, I'm going to follow up to there. Now the reason we're also not doing the faces is because he is looking down. So when you're looking at the highlights, you can see it already brightening up from the tallest point to the highest. So we're going to move on to the other one now. And we're going to start with that hand. We're just going to get the very tops of those 4 index fingers. And just like with before with the tail, we're just following the very top. I'm going to follow it up. And slightly over the top there, because the tail curls back a little, if you see. And for his wrist, we're just going to do the very top of that. Just put one little dot. Now we are moving to our final highlight of the skin tones. This is episode 6, so episode 7 will have the green skin tones and the blue tones for this figure. Because we're not going to do much blue tone, we're really just going to do right there and on that bracer. But to get that final highlight, we're just going to make one thin line all the way up the tail of Elven Flesh. With this one, the very tip of the horns, the very tip of his knuckles on that one, very tip of his hand on that one. On this one, same concept. Just a very thin, almost not even recognizable line. Up the tail. Just the tip of the fingers. We're going to touch that knuckle up. The very tip of the horns. We might go down a little bit more than we did on the other figure. And then just a single dot. So we did a base coat. We did our first highlight, our second highlight, our third highlight, now our fourth highlight. And this is what we've gotten. If you look at that tail, you can see I'm trying to get to focusing. You can see the natural highlights of each stroke on that, leading to the finalized very tip of it being highlighted. This is why I love miniature painting, everyone. Because you can make something look so natural with so little work. I mean, look at that hand. Let's see if I can focus in on that hand. You can kind of see it already just in that right there. How it just slowly, gradually goes down his wrist. And that's because the hand kind of turns upward. But I am proud of what we have accomplished in just the short few videos that we have done. Like I said, the next video we are going to be doing the zombie flesh. And we are going to be doing the blue highlights. With that, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow our Etsy store, possibly purchase something from our Etsy store if you want. Like I said, the majority of our stock in Etsy is miniature painting, us painting your miniatures for you. And the final bit of information that I can really give is follow our Facebook page. Our Facebook pages are going to be put onto the channels so that everyone can follow. Thank you. Have a great day.